On July 17, 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out between the leftist forces and the nationalists. The left was supported by the Soviet Union, while the nationalists received support from Germany and substantial aid from Italy and Portugal. The front stabilized on August 22nd. On September 1st, an offensive on Madrid began, but it resulted in the capture of only a few streets. On November 10th, a major offensive in the north was launched, which lasted until April 1937 and ended with the defeat of Republican forces. After this defeat, a communist coup took place in Republican Spain. The communists gained a decisive advantage and crushed the few divisions that opposed them. During this chaos, the nationalists pushed the communists back in the south and captured Madrid. Barcelona became the new capital of communist Spain. News of the capitulation of Republican forces in the Basque Country angered Stalin, as he had hoped Republican Spain would become his ally. He began considering sending larger forces to Spain. A few days later, he learned that communists had taken power in Republican Spain, which settled the matter. By May 1937, Soviet troops began arriving in Spain. On July 2nd, a major offensive was launched, encircling Madrid. Soviet forces advanced further west to prevent the nationalists from relieving their allies. During these battles, Soviet and German tanks clashed near Guadarrama. German forces under Heinz Guderian had a twofold advantage, but Soviet troops completely defeated them. On August 15th, Spanish-Soviet forces launched an offensive in the north. This time, the nationalists withdrew to avoid encirclement. On September 4th, an offensive in the south began, and by November, the nationalists were pushed out of the southern salient. In December, another offensive was launched but had to be halted in March of the following year due to heavy losses. On March 12, 1938, Germany annexed Austria without a single shot being fired. In April 1938, Comintern forces launched another offensive, achieving only limited success. After this, the front shortened significantly, favoring the defenders. The communists made multiple attempts to break through, but all failed. In October 1938, communist forces were exhausted after another failed offensive. The nationalists saw this as their last chance and launched a full-scale attack along the entire front. They failed to break through in the south, where Soviet forces were stationed, but elsewhere the offensive succeeded. Communist Spanish forces collapsed, were divided, and completely destroyed. The nationalists now had an open attack to Barcelona and the opportunity to outflank Soviet forces. However, new Soviet troops had recently arrived in Spain. They filled the gap left by the destroyed communist army. Upon arrival, they immediately launched a counter-offensive. This time, the nationalists were forced into retreat. By February 1939, Soviet forces had completely shattered nationalist armies. Many divisions avoided total destruction, including Italian forces, which evacuated in January 1939. Fascist Spanish forces withdrew to colonies in Africa and the Balearic Islands, where they planned to establish a new state. This was possible because most of the fleet sided with the nationalists, and despite heavy losses, they destroyed the communist fleet in October 1938. Thus ended the Spanish Civil War, although remnants of defeated divisions continued fighting as guerrillas, and some fled to Portugal. Communist Spain aimed to completely defeat the nationalists, but required a fleet to do so. Therefore, it began expanding its navy. When Germany attacked France, Spain took advantage and invaded Portugal. The first strike came in the north, where Spanish forces pushed the Portuguese behind a river. Soon after, Spain attacked along the entire front. In the south, they easily reached the river, as the Portuguese abandoned defense of that region. Fearing the communists, Portugal adopted elements of a scorched earth strategy. At the same time, nationalist Spain saw an opportunity and sent all its forces to Portugal. These units were reinforced by soldiers who had fled Spain after the Civil War. Portuguese forces now outnumbered the communists, and nationalist guerrillas began operating behind communist lines, disrupting their supply. Allied forces launched a counter-offensive, broke through, and pushed communist forces deeper into Spain. The Portuguese then outflanked them by crossing the river and attacking from the flank, linking up with nationalist guerrillas. After weakening communist forces, the Portuguese advanced east, reaching Madrid. In this situation, nationalist Spain requested help from Germany and Italy, but both were engaged in war with France and could not assist. When Soviet forces arrived, the front stabilized briefly before the Communists launched another full-scale offensive. Despite this, with the help of nationalist guerrillas, the Allies managed to capture Madrid. Portugal received its last reserves from nationalist Spain and colonial troops, along with newly mobilized divisions. However, Communist forces continued their offensive. Upon reaching the Portuguese border, the Communists faced severe supply problems due to not controlling Madrid. They had to capture the city first before resuming the offensive. This gave Portugal time to produce or purchase weapons and equip additional troops. After capturing Madrid, the Communists launched another offensive. They took the southern part of the country, but this shortened the front, allowing the Allies to defend effectively along rivers. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, increasingly fearing a German invasion, aimed to quickly defeat Portugal and withdraw its forces. Therefore, the Communists launched a massive offensive. Fierce fighting followed, with heavy losses on both sides. Portuguese counterattacks inflicted significant damage, but ultimately the Communist forces broke through. Portugal was pushed back to the sea, from where it launched desperate counterattacks, inflicting heavy losses. Eventually, however, Portuguese forces were defeated. The nationalists withdrew from Portugal to their colonies. One division failed to retreat and remained with the Portuguese, defending Lisbon. The Communists began the siege of Lisbon but could not capture it due to strong defenses. The siege was ineffective because Lisbon was supplied by sea, as the Portuguese navy dominated the Communist Spanish fleet.